So it started, or it's already started. Participants are here already, right?
I think we're
Yes,
recording. Yeah,
yes,
recording. It says
yep,
top right for me.
Yeah, and
yep,
then a
they're all good.
participant.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, so it's 12 o'clock. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to this Cardiff Japanese webinar series. My name is Mayu Negami Hanford. I'm a lecturer in Japanese studies in modern languages in Cardiff University. Thank you for coming to the 17th Cardiff Japanese webinar series, exploring social-cultural aspects of Japanese language learning. We also would like to say big thank you for the Japan Foundation London to supporting this lecture series. The Cardiff Japanese lecture series aims to share contemporary insight and foster broader understanding of Japanese societies, diverse cultural context. We explore social cultural aspects of Japanese language and culture for learners, teachers, and researchers interested in Japan. Today's 70s Cardiff Japanese lecture series today, this time is Dogen, a Japan-based YouTuber known for comedy sketches and Japanese language education. We are very, very excited to welcome back Dogen as our guest. And today's webinar will be in an interview format where we'll discuss various topics related to Japanese language learning while listening to Dogen's insights. And we'll be covering a range of questions that we prepared in advance. And today's questions will touch on a variety of topics from what inspired Dogen to start learning Japanese to practical advice on overcoming the perceived difficulty of Japanese. And so, 本set, yes. And during the talk, uh, please feel free to submit questions using the Q&A function. However, please note that we can only address questions relating to previously asked questions to Dogen or those related to his responses to those questions. And please type your questions in the Q&A box and we'll review them after the lecture. And you can also upvote your other audience questions to help us prioritize. And please keep in mind that we may not have time to answer every question today. And please kindly avoid using the chat box for questions. And also in the webinar, all your microphones will be muted, and this webinar is being recorded, and the recorded session video will be in the Cardiff Japanese online lecture series YouTube channel. And Yuko will be putting the link to you in the chat box later. And I know that many of you are Dogen devoted fans already here today, so there may be no need for me to introduce him, but let me introduce Dogen to you briefly. Okay. So, standing at the crossroad of comedy and Japanese phonetics, Dogen is known for his humorous YouTube sketches tackling Japanese culture and life in Japan, as well as for his proficiency with the Japanese language. Originally from the United States, he graduated with degree in Japanese linguistics after studying abroad for a year in Tokyo. Following graduation, he returned to Japan in 2009 as a JET program participant with a placement in Oita Prefecture that eventually led to him working in administration at the university in Oita. He began to create content for YouTube in 2016, starting what has become a channel with 80 million views and more than 600,000 subscribers around the world. Now based in Beppu, Oita Prefecture, he also teaches Japanese phonetics and pitch accent online and has digitally published multiple analogies and works of short fiction in Japanese. So, thank you very much, Dogen-san, for taking the time today.
Yeah, it's absolutely my pleasure. Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. Just a
Yes.
heads up, I tend to ramble when I give answers,
Mhm.
so I'm going to use the timer function on my watch when I answer questions. So if you see me like look down every now and then, that's me trying to keep track of time so that I don't spend too much time on one question.
Okay, yeah, okay. I'll try to be flexible as well with you. Okay, and
Thank you.
then I met my student today, and then many of my students were so excited to see you today. So yeah, so I'm
Great.
sure my students are kind of waiting for your talk. So thank you so much. So as I told you, we've got about 12 or 13 questions today. So I'm gonna start from the question number one. Is that okay? Is that okay? So,
Yep. Yeah.
okay. So, could you tell us what inspired? Oh, sorry. Could you tell us what inspired you to start learning Japanese? Also, what aspects of Japanese culture did you find appealing at that time?
Mm. Okay. So I've always been very fascinated by martial arts. I watched the movie Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon when I want to say like 12 or 13 years old in the movie theater. And I just thought it was the coolest thing ever because I was so used to doing kind of Western sports, ball sports, soccer, basketball, baseball, football. And this was kind of a different form of athletic activity that was equally, if not significantly more refined, but completely different. And it just kind of completely captured me. And that was kind of my introduction to Asian culture at large, because I was raised in a in a Catholic family, but in a primarily Caucasian neighborhood. And so I didn't know that many. I mean, there were some Asian people like at my school, but I didn't know many of them personally. And I didn't have that many connections to, well, yeah, I would say Asian culture in general. And so when I saw Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, I was just like, this is unbelievably cool. And I got kind of interested in martial arts. Originally, it was kind of kung fu, but then I learned a little bit more about karate, and then I learned a little bit more about like Japan, and I started listening to a bunch of Japanese music. I saw that there's some questions about like J-pop. I'm excited to get to those later. But it kind of slowly transitioned from martial arts into Japanese music. And so I guess I don't know if this is the best answer in terms of Japanese culture, but Japanese pop culture, particularly J-pop, just like absolutely fascinated me. And in retrospect, I think that part of that might come down to the fact that I didn't know what was going on. I think that because I didn't understand Japanese, my mind had a little bit of wiggle room, so to speak. So I could kind of imagine Japan as being this place. It could kind of be this utopia. And even though I didn't understand the lyrics of the songs, I felt like there was kind of like this deep connection to the songs that I had. And in retrospect, there were a lot of lyrics in those songs that I learned after the fact, and they were extremely deep and they resonated with me a lot after the fact. But I think a lot of it really comes down to, again, martial arts and Japanese pop culture, J-pop. I did watch a lot of anime as well, but I know that a lot of people kind of get their introduction to Japanese culture, Japanese pop culture primarily through anime, but
Mm.
that wasn't my case. I kind of learned more about anime and started watching anime after I had already been listening to Japanese music for several
Mhm.
years.
Okay, so karate first and J-pop, Japanese music and an animation.
That's
So, are you
correct.
a master of karate now?
Well, that's a great question. I never ended up taking formal martial arts training because um, all of the ball sports clubs that I was in, they were all free. So like the
Oh, okay.
soccer club, the basketball club, et cetera, it was all kind of done through my school.
Mm.
And they never cost any money. So it was never like a burden on my family or anything like that.
Mm.
But all of the places that you could learn karate, it was like these private lessons that cost
Yeah.
hundreds of dollars a month. And my
Mm.
parents were like, "Oh, this is a phase. You'll grow out of it. You don't know any you won't go to Japan when you're older." And so I ended up learning what's called martial arts tricking. It's kind of like this combination of martial arts and gymnastics and breakdancing and
Oh, that sounds
parkour.
cool.
Yeah, but there's two groups of people that were in that community. There was the martial artists that had that formal background, and
Mm.
then there were the people known as the backyard tricksters, and that was me. It was the people that basically just experimented, like throwing their body around in their backyard until they could do like a backflip. So
Okay.
yeah.
Well,
But
thank
yeah, I never did any
you.
formal martial arts training, but I did do martial arts tricking for about 10 years and I got okay at that. I was never great at that, but I was also never, well, I was terrible when I began, but I ended up being average by the time that I stopped.
Oh, wow. 10 years is quite a long time. So, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Dogen-san. So, shall we move on to question number two? Okay.
Sure, sure.
これですね。本性。So we often hear that Japanese is difficult. However, despite this perceived difficulty, many people continue to learn Japanese. I believe that when people start learning something, they may hinder their progress by deciding in advance that it is difficult. Do you have any advice on how to overcome the notion that Japanese is difficult and enjoy the learning process? And additionally, how can beginners resolve any mindset that might hold them back from learning Japanese effectively?
Mm. Yeah, I think this is a great question. Well, I certainly do think that Japanese is difficult. Sorry, let me start my watch again. Um, but one of the things that always helped me, well, I think separate from the advice that I'm about to give, I'm kind of lucky in the sense that I have a very obsessive personality. So when I get into something, I get really, really, really into it. And because Japanese was the thing that I was into for a long time, despite the fact that it was difficult, it never really felt like a chore for me. But one of the things that I know helped me in the times where I had to study Japanese, but for example, when I was still into martial arts tricking and martial arts tricking was my priority at the time, in those times, what really helped me with my Japanese was always having a very specific goal that wasn't too far out of reach. So, for example, again, I started getting into Japanese music initially. And so I thought, okay, well, I had like a Japanese music CD, but I couldn't read anything because it was all in Japanese, of course. And so I thought, okay, well, okay, my first goal, I'm going to memorize hiragana. And okay, got that down. Okay, now I'm going to memorize katakana. Okay, got that down. Okay, my next goal is I'm going to remember like 100 kanji. Okay, got that down. And it just kind of like kept going from there. So it eventually became, okay, my next big goal is I'm going to study abroad in Japan. And I ended up going to a Japanese or ended up going to university. They had an exchange program. I got to Japan. And then once I actually got there, my goal was I'm going to become conversationally fluent by the time I go back home. Once I got back home, I was like, okay, well, I was concentrating on conversation the whole time. Now I'm going to get good at reading. Like I want to be able to read this Murakami Haruki book with basically without a terrible amount of hindrances and getting too bogged down along the way. So kind of just always having a goal, whether that's I want to be able to understand this anime without needing to reference like my dictionary every now and then, or without needing to like look at the subtitles, or like by the end of this year, I want to be able to watch just this 20-minute episode of this this TV show and I'll watch it like 100 times on repeat if I need to. But if I can
Mhm.
understand that, then I'll be happy. I
Mhm.
think having specific goals like that, but also again, making sure that the goals are never too far out of reach. Because if you just start learning Japanese and your goal is, I'm going to get N1 by like the end of the year or something like that. Because there are a couple of people on YouTube that seem to have been able to do that, get N1 in like a year and a half or something like that. And I do think that it's possible. But I also think at the same time, it's only possible for a very specific type of person that has a very specific, their mind is wired in a very specific way. And if you compare yourself to that kind of person, you might end up feeling discouraged because you set a goal that was perhaps a little bit too lofty for the circumstances that you were in. Maybe that person was able to study Japanese and get N1 in a year because they didn't have as many obligations as you do. And if you, again, try and set these overly ambitious goals, especially early on, it might end up, again, kind of feeling discouraging. And so I would say always have a goal, make sure that the goal is in reach. But then my final piece of advice would be um, have a study plan that supplements what you want to do with your Japanese. And what I mean by that is I knew by the time that I was about to graduate from university that I wanted to get into creative writing in Japanese later in life. And so despite the fact that I wasn't very good at Japanese kanji at that time, like I couldn't write too many kanji. I could read a fair amount, but I kind of made a very conscious decision to never worry about whether or not I could write kanji. I was like, well, I want to get into creative writing. I want to know more about what word to choose for what specific circumstance. That to me is more specific, is more important than whether or not I can write that word in like the correct junbang, kakijun. And so again, that having that kind of goal and knowing where I was going and being able to orient my study plan around that helped me tremendously.
Okay, thank you, Dogen.
Mhm.
Yeah, so let's move on to the next question.
Sure.
To- uh, how should Japanese learners balance mastering formal aspects of the language with enjoying its more casual everyday use? Most learning materials focus on formal Japanese, and there are fewer resources for casual language. Do you have any recommendations for learning casual Japanese?
Yeah. It's funny. This is one of the things that I'm really jealous of when it comes to the people that are currently learning Japanese. And what I mean by that is when I was learning Japanese, it was even more so. This was the case, but even more so. And what I mean by that what is there was no YouTube and there was no streaming services or anything like that, like when I was in high school and the first few years of university. So if I wanted to get like a casual Japanese learning resource, then I'd have to do a bunch of research on the internet to find like a Japanese movie or something like that that used casual Japanese. And then I'd have to like physically import it from Japan because there's no way like the local, like bookstore or movie store would have that kind of resource. And so I think the people that are learning Japanese today have so many great resources at their disposal. And if I was relearning Japanese, what I would do is I would use both. Again, there are a lot of textbooks out there that are great for learning kind of formal Japanese, but beyond that, they're kind of just really good because they provide structure that's hard to come by if you try and just wing it. I do think that something like Genki can be a fantastic resource, whether you're learning Japanese in a classroom setting or by yourself, because it covers Japanese in a very holistic way, which I think is good for people that are getting started. That being said, I think that especially for people who eventually want to get to a very high level of Japanese, at the same time that they are using a textbook, they should immerse themselves in as much Japanese as possible through resources such as YouTube, Netflix, Crunchyroll, various streaming services. And there are dozens of movies and YouTube channels that are out there where you can very, very easily expose yourself to all sorts of Japanese, whether that's formal or more casual Japanese. And without getting into too much details, I'm also going to be releasing a new resource in the not too distant future where we hope to be able to kind of provide something that's kind of in between the two, where people are able to learn formal Japanese, but in a way that doesn't feel as mm, なんていうのかな。堅苦しいでいいですかね。
Ah, 堅苦し
Yeah.
い. Mm. Yeah,
So,
that sounds
yeah,
good.
not
Yeah.
quite as like I don't know how to say that in English. Well, yeah, in a way that's maybe a little bit more fun and engaging than just a textbook.
Okay. So when are you planning to release the new materials from you?
Within the next 6 months.
Oh, exciting. Oh,
Yeah.
please let us know through your Twitter page and things.
Oh, yeah, I definitely will. Thank you.
That's great. Oh, thank you so much. Okay, so let's move on to number four, question number four. One sec. Okay. In the context of media globalization, how do you think Japanese pop culture can be utilized as a tool for language learning? For example, animation, movies, or music?
Mm. I'm not so sure about the context of media globalization specifically, but in terms of
So, yeah.
using
Mm,
Japanese pop culture, anime, movies, and music to learn Japanese, I definitely did it.
mm.
And I definitely think that it's one of the most effective ways to study Japanese because, again, if you are only using a textbook, it might kind of feel a little bit like a chore. But if you're able to get something, get a resource that will stimulate your emotions. That is the kind of, well, that's the best way to learn because when emotion is involved, you're significantly less likely to forget what you're talking, what's happening at that very moment. So I always tell people when they're learning Japanese to try and make as many not try and make mistakes, but not be afraid of making mistakes because if you make a mistake, and you embarrass yourself, you'll never forget it and you'll never make that same mistake again. That being said, going back to Japanese pop culture, one of the single most effective things that I ever did for learning Japanese was taking a Japanese movie. It was called 12人の優しい日本人. It's this Japanese movie. It's kind of based off of the movie 12 Angry Men. It's like this Hollywood movie from I think the 1960s. But it's kind of like a variation of that that's kind of more of a comedy. But it's a courtroom drama, and being a courtroom drama, it's all dialogue from start to finish. And so it's perfect for learning in that case because there's not a lot of bits where there's like a long silence. It's you really get a really good bang for your buck. It's nonstop talking from start to finish. And the movie starts with all these uh the jurors, they don't know each other, so they're using very um like Kegel at the beginning. But then as they get to know each other and like some of them realize that they're the same age, they kind of relax and use less formal Japanese. And because there's a story involved as well, it's engaging. And when I watched that probably the very first time maybe like my first week during study abroad. A Japanese friend lent it to me. They said, "This is a really fun, really great movie. You should check it out." I watched it. I had no idea what was going on because my Japanese wasn't nearly good enough to understand even the basics at the time of what was happening. But I just watched it on repeat all the time. And I would look up like one word a day. And as I did that, I started like kind of like filling in the gaps because if there were five words in a sentence, A, B, C, D, E, and I looked up words A, B, C, D, then oftentimes in context, I could understand what word E meant. So I started picking up words through osmosis. And the better your Japanese gets, the more often and easier it is to do that. And especially if it's the same resource. If you're watching like an anime that has, I don't know, like 100 episodes or something, there might be a bunch of different characters and you might hear a bunch of phrases that kind of go in one ear and out the other. But if you watch the same thing over and over and over and over again, you kind of get that in your bones. Like it's in your long-term muscle memory, so to speak. You can start to anticipate like what the actors are gonna say. And like even now, when that if someone were to play that movie, I could probably like recite basically every single line because I watched it that often. But
Wow.
I really think that I learned more Japanese from that single movie and rewatching it so many times than probably anything else.
Wow. That's great. Okay. So I'm going to ask you about the popular music next. Okay.
Sure.
So do you listen? I mean, I know you listen to Japanese pop music, but who are your favorite Japanese pop musicians? Many students study Japanese using J-pop lyrics. Could you
Mm,
recommend some J-pop artists for Japanese learners?
sure. Oh man, where do I even start? So, excuse me, let me start my watch again. Okay.
Okay.
Well, I know like a lot of people these days, they're into like Ado, for example, and she's fantastic. She's incredible. And most of the kind of more modern J-pop, I'm not as familiar with. I still listen to a fair amount of it, like Creepy Nuts, they're incredible as well. But I'm gonna recommend a bunch of musicians and bands and groups that are kind of from like 10 years ago or 15 years ago or 20 years ago. So one of the greatest J-pop albums of all time, if not the greatest J-pop album of all time, is, in my opinion, is Utada Hikaru's Deep River. I believe that
Oh,
it's her second or third album. Not positive. It's definitely not her first, but that album is timeless. And every single song on that album, it it's completely different from all the other songs on the album and also completely just utterly captivating. Like a lot of people know the song excuse me, um Hikari from Kingdom Hearts. There was like this giant J-pop boom. I want to say around when would that have been? 2003-ish because Utada Hikaru's song Hikari, I don't know the name of it in English, but it was the theme song for a very popular video game called Kingdom Hearts. And it was so funny because at the time I had been listening to J-pop for like 5 years straight, like nothing but J-pop. And like all of my friends and everyone who knew that I listened to J-pop came to me and they were like, Dogen, oh, I know you're into J-pop. You got to hear this song, Hikari by Utada Hikaru. Man, I was listening to this song like a year ago.
oh, really? So,
Yeah,
Dogen, what can you tell us about the title of the album, Utada Hikaru album? What was it?
Deep River.
Deep River. Okay, I'll check
Yes.
that.
And I think that the greatest J-pop song ever
Mm-hmm.
written
Mm.
is, oh man, there's two, but one would be 名前が出てこない。
It's really difficult,
新
isn't it?
宿は、ちょっと待ってください。
You can sing
え
if you
ーっ
want.
と、群青日和
群青日
by,
和.
by 東京事変。
Oh, that's the my head.
椎名林檎.
Sheena Ringo, isn't she?
Yes.
Okay.
I think that's, oops.
Gunjo Biori.
I think that's if I had to choose like the greatest J-pop song ever written, I would choose either that or Senko Shoujo,
先行少女。
which is also actually a Tokyo Jihen song.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but then if I know that we're out of time for this specific question, but two more artists that I would highly, highly, highly recommend.
Mm.
One is Go Go 7188.
Google 7188.
They broke up a long time ago, but I think that they are fantastic. The thing that I love about them so much is that there's a ton of amazing J-pop punk bands,
Mhm.
but the thing that makes them so unique is that the singer sings in this kind of like enka
I
style.
see. Okay.
So it's kind of fundamentally different than any other J punk rock band, and
Mm-hmm.
her voice is just so incredible.
Okay.
But then the other one
Mm.
from the same era would be Supercar, which is
Supercar.
kind of like they also broke up, but they're kind of like Radiohead.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
Wow.
they were also kind of like this minor rock band that started to slowly implement more electronic into
Yeah.
their music over the years. Let me see. I gotta get the name of this album right. Su Futurama. ちょ
Futurama.
っと待ってください。
はい。
あ、カタカナか。うーん、albums。うーん、Futurama。ん
Do you think you can find it? Maybe you can talk about it later.
Okay, we'll come back to that. But
Yeah, let's
the
come back to this.
supercar, I guarantee anyone out there that's been studying Japanese for more than 5 years has
Mm.
heard a supercar song. They just didn't realize it was a supercar song because the band broke up
Ah,
so long ago. But their music has been in like so many movies and stuff like that.
okay. I'll check that. Okay. So, okay, thank you, Dogen-san. So let's move on to the next one. Okay.
Sure.
Hey, hey. For students studying Japanese outside of Japan who dream of visiting one day, could you recommend places to visit or experience to try while in Japan?
Absolutely. So my
Yeah, quick
number one
advice is fine. Yeah.
recommendation would be Minato Mirai in Yokohama.
Why is that?
I love that place. And the reason why is that when I was growing up and I had been envisioning Japan, I had heard it was like this really futuristic place and everything was like really streamlined and like the trains are so efficient and like everything is like there's robots everywhere. And I was like, oh, that sounds amazing. And then I got to Tokyo, but there are many areas of Tokyo that look more or less the same in terms of like the general layout of the town and the way that it's kind of oriented around a train station. And there are a couple of course, kind of like iconic places, whether that's, Harajuku, like Takeshita Dori, or Shibuya, uh, Marunoichi,
Yeah.
Tokyo Eki. All of those places are great as well. But the thing that I love so much about Minato Mirai in Yokohama is that everything, it's the way that I had imagined Tokyo looking before I actually came to Tokyo. Like it looks super futuristic. They've got like this giant kannansha, giant Ferris wheel
Mm.
that's kind of like sitting on this like mini artificial man-made island that has like this tiny little amusement park surrounded by water. And then there's this giant building that my friend Chris Broad always describes looking like a chess piece, and it really does. It's
Mm.
Landmark Tower in Yokohama. Um, and it's like next to these other buildings that like are consecutively smaller, but they have the same design language. It very much looks like there was like a single person that designed like that entire like 3 mile radius. Like there was a vision for that whole area. And it's always super clean. And there's this nice like ocean breeze that comes in.
Ah,
And the architecture again is amazing. And it's never very crowded. I don't do terribly well with crowds. And so again, like definitely go to like Shibuya, um, Ichimaru-kyu, like all these
mm,
iconic places. But if you ever feel like exhausted, but you still want to go somewhere fun and nice and relaxing in
mm,
Japan, Minato Mirai in
mm.
Yokohama is like my number one destination.
Oh,
Um, Other places, if you're going to kind of be going around Japan in general, I really like Beppu where I live. I love like the onsen. I love the fact that the town is in between the ocean and the mountains and it's kind of like this cozy place. It's more of like a better place to live than to spend like a 2 week vacation or something like
mm,
that. But and then Kobe also I really like as a town. I actually went there with my wife and my daughters a couple weeks ago. We went to USJ, Universal Studios Japan. So that was a lot of fun. It was my first time going there since I think I want to say like in 10 years. I went with my cousin a couple of times a long time ago, but it's always really fun to go there. But yeah,
okay.
Yokohama, Kobe, Beppu, and
Beppu.
then yeah, as well as the more iconic places in
Okay.
Tokyo.
Okay. Wow, Minato Mirai. Yeah, that's in Yokohama. Yeah, that's in Kanagawa, Yokohama, isn't it? Yeah.
That's correct, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Thank you for the advice. So let's move on to the next one. And number seven, students who have worked hard to learn Japanese and Japanese culture often face various challenges when they finally arrive in Japan. These difficulties can go beyond language barriers and include issues related to Japanese customs, values, gender discrimination, among others. Have you had any experiences with such challenges? If so, how would you advise dealing with these realities when they arise in Japan?
Hmm,
Oh, sorry.
great question. I this is like the topic of every single one of my YouTube videos. It's
Mm,
like the challenges of going to like City Hall or the challenges of going to I don't know like a business meeting where it feels like do we really need to be having like a meeting about this? I feel like this could have just been like an email, but what I would say is that one of the reasons that these difficult, a lot of people, myself included, have so much difficulty with these kind of things is because they catch us off guard. Before we go to Japan or before we come to Japan, as is the case for me, we like to think that, again, foreigners that are into Japan have the tendency to fantasize Japan, to again kind of make it out as like this utopia in their mind. And so when they're back in the States, I know that I certainly did this before coming to Japan, but I always felt like, man, everything is like so backwards here. Like I can't wait to go to Japan and like have all my problems be solved. And it felt like all my problems were solved the first year that I was here because I was making all these mistakes, but no one was correcting me because they kind of just assumed that I was like the foreigner that didn't understand things. And so it wasn't until like later on that I realized, oh, like you can't be doing things like this way anymore. And yeah, like there are a lot of things in Japanese culture that just like back in your home country, whether that's the United States or somewhere in Europe, wherever it might be that there are pros and cons of both culture. And if you over fantasize Japan, if you really kind of again make it out to this utopia, then that jolt can be you can kind of get like whiplash. What can happen is you come to Japan and you're like, but it has to be perfect. I'm so disappointed, but the only reason that you're disappointed is because you were the one that made it out to be something that it wasn't. And so I think the most important thing to realize is that again, Japan, like anywhere else, it's got its problems, but it's a wonderful place to live. And I am really glad with my decision to move to Japan. I moved to Japan when I was about 22 years old, right after I graduated from university. And despite all these, barriers, whether that's related to, customs, values, discrimination, whatever it might be, I still would definitely live in Japan as opposed to basically any other place. That being said, I think it's very important to point out that most places are wonderful places to live, and most places have really interesting cultures once you get to know like the people that live there. Everywhere that I've ever traveled, whether that's in Japan, I used to travel all around the world for well, all around Southeast and Southeast Asia for APU. I went to Hong Kong, I went to Thailand, I went to Indonesia, I went to let's say Lumpur in Malaysia. I went to, yeah, just all these cities across Southeast Asia, and every place that I went, I was just like, man, this place is incredible. And I think home is where you make it out to be, and a lot of it really comes down to attitude. You're going to have problems. You're going to have problems whether you're in Japan or whether in your home country. And my friend Ricciardo, who I think probably a lot of people watching might also know, he said it really well in this interview that he did in a YouTube channel that I saw. I want to say, I don't know, a couple months ago, but he was really blunt about it. And he said, look, if you're a loser in your home country and you come to Japan, you're going to be a loser in Japan too.
True.
And I think there's a lot of truth in that. You can't
Mm.
come to Japan and expect Japan to fix your problems. You're going to have to confront your problems. And I see a lot of people that come to Japan, and it's actually not the Japanese customs and values and stuff like that that really get to them. It's the fact that they weren't able to create the life in Japan that they wanted because they ended up getting lazy. So, like, I know a lot of people that came to Japan. I don't know them personally, but I've seen a lot of people that have come to Japan, like through the JET program, and always dreamed of getting out of teaching English because teaching English was just kind of a way that they got their foot in the door. But because they failed to do the additional effort in that, comes in becoming like a translator or working in like an animation studio or something like that, they kind of got stuck in that environment teaching something that they were never really that passionate about. So I always tell people, if you want to, if you would teach English even outside of Japan, then you'll have a fantastic time teaching English in Japan. But don't come to Japan to teach English just because you like Japan, because eventually you'll end up spending every day teaching English, and the novelty of being in Japan will wear off, and you'll be stuck doing something that you're not terribly passionate about. So figure out exactly what it is that you want to do before you come to Japan, and then set up the necessary steps and figure out exactly what you need to do in order to make that a reality. Because if you don't, then you'll end up kind of trapping yourself in this circle,
Mm.
and I've seen again many people say that it's the language barrier or it's
Mm.
the culture or the customs or whatever it might be, when in reality it may be much it may in fact be a combination of different things, and perhaps the largest factor may involve lack of additional necessary effort.
Mm. Yeah, I think this advice is a very, really, really helped a lot of students here. Well, thank you so much for the great advice, Dogen.
Mm.
Okay, so let's move on to the next question. What opportunities have opened up for you as a result of learning Japanese? Could you provide specific examples and explain how you have leveraged these opportunities? Now you are famous YouTuber. I think that's a result of the from the learning Japanese. But is there any other opportunities that you had because you have studied Japanese?
Mm. Yes, I think this is going to be a little bit difficult to articulate, but
Mhm.
I once heard someone say that having kids allows you to experience things that you've already experienced hundreds of times for the first time again, because you can experience it more or less through their eyes as they're reacting to it. So, for example, um, I've seen fireworks probably 30 times. So it's always fun to see fireworks, but the very first time you see fireworks, and it's like, those big noises and just like how fantastic it looks up in the sky. It's a real like wow kind of moment. And when you have kids that are experiencing something for the first time, when you watch them react to that, you can kind of relive that magic through them. And I found that to be true. And there's so many things in terms of like learning Japanese that you learn to see things in a different way. And I think that it's kind of abstract. Of course, like learning Japanese has opened a lot of doors for me because now that I can speak Japanese, I can make well, I can have conversations with Japanese people and I can make YouTube videos about that and I can read, manga and stuff like that. But it's less of the fact that I can read a manga in Japanese, it's that I can pick up on the things that are happening in the manga that I wouldn't have been able to pick up on if I only understood American culture. But because Japanese is the language that is, it's fundamentally intertwined with Japanese culture. There are so many things like scenes in anime and movie scenes and stuff like that that hit different. They feel slightly different, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse, when you understand those cultural nuances as well. And I think that that has been a really, really interesting thing. There's just so many things like with the Japanese language as well, like being able to articulate thoughts in a different way. It's one of the really cool things about Japanese is that you can communicate more with the same amount of characters. So one of the reasons that Twitter is so popular in Japan is because Twitter for the longest time had like a 70 letter limit or something like that, but you can express more with 70 kanji than you can with 70 Roman alphabet letters. And so, or I don't know if it was words or symbols or whatever, but the point is the same. You can express more with Japanese, and that's true for spoken Japanese as well. So it enables you to also not only communicate ideas differently, but also more concisely, which I really like because
Mm.
although it might not seem like it because of how much I'm rambling right now, I really value brevity when it comes to
Mm.
writing. So yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for the
Hmm.
advice. That's great. And then, so we have another 30 minutes, and then we have got this question. But can I come back to this number nine? And then,
Sure, sure,
yeah, can I do this number 12 first? Okay.
sure,
Is that
sure.
okay? So, what advice would you give to learners who want to incorporate Japanese practice into their daily lives in a fun and sustainable way? Also, what advice would you offer to beginners who might feel overwhelmed by the complexity of Japanese to help them stay motivated and not give up?
Mm, I think probably this isn't like a revolutionary answer or anything like that, but find some kind of J-pop, sorry, not J-pop, but Japanese pop culture
Mhm.
thing, whether that's music or anime or a movie or a video game, whatever it might be, something that you resonate with and use that in addition to your Japanese formal studies with the textbook. This kind of overlaps a little bit like what I talked about earlier, but like Final Fantasy VII, the original, that's my favorite video game of all time. It's an incredible video game. And when the remake came out about 4 years ago at this point, maybe, yeah, probably about 4 years ago at this point, I replayed the whole game in Japanese. I played the remake in Japanese from start to finish, and it didn't feel like I was studying because I was playing my favorite video game. Now, of course, I have that luxury because I already understand a high level of Japanese, a high amount of Japanese. But again, even if you don't understand quite that much, or even if you're just starting out, if you supplement what you're doing with like a textbook with like an anime show that you're really, really into, whether that's One Punch Man or like Soul no Frieren or Attack on Titan, or if you're watching, if you're reading like Akira or something like that, whatever it might be, you can reward yourself and study through those rewards at the same time that you're doing the more that you're grinding. And I think that if you do that, you'll be able to avoid crashing. Because again, kind of going back to what I talked about earlier, this kind of answers the second part of the question. But if you set your goals too high and you never reward yourself, then you will almost certainly end up crashing and burning. And it's funny, getting like a slightly philosophical, there's a reason that, not philosophical, but going on a related tangent, there's a reason that every single major world religion has days where you're not supposed to work, whether that's Judaism or Buddhism or Christianity, like Protestant Christians or Catholicism, whatever it might be. They always have days when you're not supposed to work because the people who are wise enough to kind of establish these religions through the generations recognized that humans can't go 100% all the time. We need downtime. We need to be able to relax. And if you try and just grind all the time, you will end up overwhelming yourself. So, again, take that into account. Have an off day, have a cheat day or whatever it might be.
Mm.
Because if you don't, you'll probably end up in a worse place than if you didn't have that time off.
Mm, it's true. That's true. Yes, that's a really, really valuable advice for the student who loves studying all the time. Yes. So,
Mm.
hold on a sec. And we've got another 9 minutes, and we might have most questions from audience today. But Chris, have you got a question from the audience today? You go on, Chris. Not today. Okay.
Yes,
Uh,
yes, there is one. Yes, there is one.
okay.
Yeah, yeah. I have a poor sense of timing, music beat, and a poor ear for pitch, and I struggle to hear the distinction when listening to you and others demonstrate differences in pitch in spoken
Mm.
Japanese. Have you encountered people who seem incapable of hearing the nuance of phonetics in Japanese language?
This is a really great question. One of the things that you can do to determine whether or not you are tone deaf, so to speak, is to just take a basic test on YouTube. That's like there are dozens of tests like this, like pitch test, and it kind of like it'll play like a couple of tones, and it will say like tone one, tone two, and it'll play it like back to back, like which one is higher. And the overwhelming majority of people that feel like they can't differentiate between like the various pitch accent patterns in Japanese feel that way just because they're not used to it yet, not because they're actually tone deaf. And if you can sing at all, even if you're a bad singer, but if you can sing like jingle bells, jingle all the way, like that's all you need to be able to pick up and replicate pitch because it's just a matter of using pitch in a different way, using pitch in a way that you're not used to. And one of the things that helped me tremendously was recording myself. And what I mean by that is when I started learning about Japanese pitch accent, I couldn't hear the differences. This is actually why I have these drills in my series where I say English words with Japanese pitch accent patterns because if it's in English, I can tell the difference, but if it's in Japanese, I can't tell the difference. And the reason for that, or I couldn't at the time, and the reason for that is because there's multiple layers of separation. You don't know how to read the word, you don't know what the word means, you don't know what the kanji are individually, and you're not used to hearing the word. So it's much more difficult to pick up on the pitch on top of that. But if it's a pitch difference in your native language, I would wager that well, most people are able to tell the difference between, for example, America and America. And if you do it in your own native language like that, and you are able to tell the difference, then that's proof that you can do it in Japanese as well with enough exposure. Now, again, I ended up recording myself was such a major breakthrough for me. I don't necessarily know why, but I do know that I was sitting in a room with my Japanese teacher, and they were saying, say Saiko, like the best. And I said, okay, Saiko. And she said, no, 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 no. You're saying Saiko. It's not Saiko, it's Saiko. And I said, well, that's what I said, Saiko. She said, no, 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 you're saying it wrong. And we had this back and forth over and over and over again. And then she got out like a recorder and she recorded my voice. And the moment that I heard my own speech in that recording, for some reason, I noticed what was happening. I was like, oh, I am doing that. I don't know what's going on there. I don't know if like you need to, if there's some kind of mechanism that happens in terms of like the way that you hear your own voice. But I wasn't able to pick up on certain pitch accent patterns in Japanese until I heard them in my own voice, or well, until I heard myself messing them up in a recording as opposed to me trying to say them in real time. So again, there are some people that really have a very, very, very difficult ability, have a difficult time in terms of differentiating pitch. But I would say don't write yourself off just yet. There's probably some additional things that you can do. And again, whether that's recording yourself, whether that's first trying to see if you can change the tone in your own language. Like if I pick a random word on screen right now, there's sustainable. If I say rather than putting the accent on the sustain, if I say sustainable, you can tell that difference, right? Or if I say Japanese, rather than saying Japanese, if I say Japanese, you can probably hear that difference as well. If you can, then you can do the same thing in Japanese. It's just a matter of slowly acclimating yourself to the different patterns.
Okay, thank you so much, Dogen. So we have got 2 more minutes, and then I think we should finish this interview at this point. Sadly, really, really sad. But thank you so much for all those valuable advice today, really, Dogen. I have learned a lot from you as well. Not only as a language learner, not as a and also as a human as well today. Thank you so much.
Oh,
Really,
とんで
really.
もないです。
本当にありがとうございました。Honse, I need to talk about this. Yes, thank you very much for everybody. Thank you so much, everybody, for the coming to the Cardiff Japanese webinar series today, Diog. And then we would be very grateful if you could complete the short survey to tell us what you thought about this lecture today. And then survey will be automatically sent to you later. And also, as I told you, the recording of this Dogen's webinar today will be on the YouTube channel, so please check that out. And it's 12 o'clock, isn't it? Yes, so we have to go soon. So thank you so much, Dogen.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you very
Yes.
much.
Yes, so hopefully, can I ask you one more question? Sorry. Is there
Sure.
any possibility that I don't know, you can come to Cardiff webinar series in the future again?
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Oh, thank you so much. Oh, it's lovely to
Yeah.
hear that. Thank you. So yes, so let's say goodbye here. So thank you so much, everybody. Diok, ありがとうございました。So thank you so much, 道元さん。
ありがとうございました。
ありがとうございました。ありがとうございました。さよなら。
さような
さよな
ら。
ら。